Welcome to a new episode of the Genius program. Dear viewers, come with me as we go back to the year 1959. Something very important is happening right now, pay attention. The Soviet Union is launching Lunar 2, a spacecraft designed with a single goal, to be the first spacecraft to reach the surface of the moon. Yes, my genius friend, you heard that right, it was the first spacecraft to reach the moon's surface. But what was the purpose? That was the purpose itself, to be the first to reach the moon. Let me tell you, my friend, the mission was successful, but the spacecraft didn't land intact, it shattered into 100 pieces. So how could it be considered a success? As I mentioned, the primary goal of the mission was scientific, to reach a higher point in space exploration and push humanity's limits. However, that wasn't the only goal. The Soviets, before loading the spacecraft with scientific instruments and equipment, placed something unusual inside, metal coins engraved with the initials of the Communist Party. You might also recognize the famous hammer and sickle emblem. The idea was that when the spacecraft crashed and broke apart, these symbols would scatter across the moon's surface. And with that, my friend, they achieved their true objective. Science. Of course, scientific exploration and human advancement were part of it. But the bigger goal was a display of power and dominance. The Soviet Union wanted to prove that they were the first to reach the moon. Even though the spacecraft was destroyed, they could still claim, "We got there first." As a political move, 2 days after the launch, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev visited the United States and handed President Dwight Eisenhower a replica of the metal coins placed on the moon. It was a symbolic gesture meant to remind the Americans that the Soviets had beaten them to the moon. Was Eisenhower deeply disturbed by this? Would he lose sleep over not reaching the moon first? Maybe not. But this small act perfectly illustrates the political rivalry behind the space race. Throughout history, the space race has always been a political battle disguised as scientific progress. In many cases, politics was more important than science. This episode is not about the history of space exploration but rather the geopolitics that now play a bigger role than ever in the space race. If we ask geography to describe Earth, it provides us with maps showing landscapes, oceans, mountains, deserts, and forests. But if we want to navigate the world, we need a different type of map, a political map with borders, visas, and travel restrictions. For a long time, space was thought to be free from such political constraints. It was vast and open, anyone could go anywhere without restrictions. But now, space is becoming increasingly crowded, with over 90 countries launching satellites. This congestion isn't just about humanity's desire to explore space. It also reflects conflicts and rivalries between nations. Power struggles on Earth are extending into space, and soon, we will need a political map for space. Instead of looking at maps horizontally, we now have to think vertically. We won't just look down at the ground, we'll look up at the sky. Let's take a journey together through different layers of space, each marked by conflicts and rivalries. To launch a rocket into space, a country needs a spaceport, similar to seaports for ships. Just as seaports require coastlines and docks, spaceports have specific requirements. First, they need a large, flat area. More importantly, they should be as close as possible to the equator. Why? Because the Earth rotates from west to east, and at the equator, it spins at 1,669 kilometers per hour. The closer a launch site is to the equator, the more it benefits from the Earth's rotation, requiring less fuel for liftoff. This is why Russia launches its rockets from Baikonur in Kazakhstan. It's the closest practical location to the equator for them. Despite Kazakhstan becoming an independent country, Russia still uses the Baikonur Cosmodrome today. Similarly, France's main spaceport isn't in Europe but in French Guiana, South America. The United States primarily launches rockets from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Although many countries have secured launch sites, the demand for spaceports is growing rapidly. In 2023, the United States conducted 103 space launches, compared to just 76 in 2022. Most of these launches occurred from Florida. This surge in demand is raising concerns. The existing launch sites might soon be insufficient to meet the growing needs of space exploration. As more countries seek access to space, the competition for launch sites is intensifying. Some nations lack the capability to launch rockets, while others have the infrastructure but offer better prices and faster launch schedules. This has turned spaceport access into a market. Countries are now looking for new launch sites, and one continent stands out as an ideal location: Africa. In recent years, Turkey has partnered with Somalia to build a spaceport, while China has collaborated with Djibouti and Kenya to establish launch facilities. This competition is heating up, drawing concerns from major powers like the United States. Washington sees China's involvement in African spaceports as a potential military expansion rather than purely scientific endeavors. In December 2023, exactly 5 years after the launch of the Japanese satellite, the China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, the main government contractor for space projects, announced that by 2027, it would begin deploying a network of satellites in very low Earth orbit, VLEO. But China didn't stop there. It decided not to launch just one satellite, but 300 satellites all at once. The stated purpose was research and surveillance, but the word surveillance carries significant military and political implications. This announcement did not go unnoticed. Less than a year later, in July 2024, NASA signed a contract with the startup Redwire to expand its own satellite network in the same orbit. What was once an overlooked orbit suddenly became a battleground for future competition, with massive military funding behind it. In this competition, the winner would be whoever could establish dominance in this low-altitude space. These increasing tensions highlight a larger trend. Rivalries are not just about scientific progress but about power and control. The competition is no longer limited to Earth. Conflicts over resources, surveillance, and strategic dominance have extended into space. If we go a little higher, we reach low Earth orbit, LEO, about 400 kilometers above sea level. This is where the International Space Station, ISS, orbits. The ISS is a symbol of international cooperation, managed by 5 space agencies: NASA, United States, Roscosmos, Russia, ESA, Europe, JAXA, Japan, and CSA, Canada. Despite political rivalries on Earth, these nations have worked together in space for over 2 decades. However, in 2022, Russia announced that it would withdraw from the ISS by 2028, in response to Western sanctions following its invasion of Ukraine. This marked the end of an era of cooperation. Instead, Russia is now working on building its own independent space station, set to launch its first module in 2030. With Russia pulling out, China saw an opportunity. It had already launched its Tiangong space station in 2022 and is now observing the ISS's decline with great interest. If the ISS shuts down and Russia fails to complete its new station, China could become the only country with an operational space station. Some may think this is insignificant, but it is a huge symbolic victory. The country with the only space station would hold a unique position in human space exploration. In his book Astropolitics, Classical Geopolitics in the Space Age, Dr. Everett Dolman describes low Earth orbit as one of the most important zones of conflict in space. The nation that controls this orbit controls near-Earth space. And whoever dominates near-Earth space controls the planet itself. This isn't just theoretical. Space technology has already played a decisive role in modern conflicts. In September 2022, during the Ukraine war, the Ukrainian Navy planned a preemptive strike on the Russian fleet in Sevastopol. However, just before the attack, their navigation and communication systems suddenly failed. GPS was down, internet access was lost, and submarines couldn't communicate with their command centers. The cause? A massive Russian cyber attack that disabled satellite-based systems in Ukraine. With their operations compromised, Ukraine turned to a private company, Elon Musk's Starlink. Starlink operates a network of over 6,000 satellites in low Earth orbit, providing global internet access. Despite Russian attempts to disrupt it, Starlink remained operational. However, when Ukraine asked Musk to restore its satellite network for military operations, he refused. He didn't want to be directly involved in a war between Russia and Ukraine. This single decision by one man could have changed the course of the war. Musk's control over global satellite communication networks drew international attention. China, for example, sees Starlink as a strategic threat and has started developing countermeasures. In January 2025, Chinese researchers conducted a computer simulation demonstrating how 99 satellites could disable 1,500 Starlink satellites in just 12 hours using advanced electronic warfare techniques. The message was clear. If Musk ever tried to assist Taiwan the way he helped Ukraine, China would not hesitate to take down his satellites. This growing space conflict raises concerns about satellite warfare. While no country has destroyed an enemy satellite yet, 4 nations have already tested anti-satellite weapons by destroying their own old satellites: the United States, China, Russia, and India. These tests were not just for show. They were practice runs for targeting enemy satellites in case of an actual space war. Beyond geopolitical tensions, there's another issue: space congestion.